Hello, you are watching Top Africa News TV. Today we have a guest, Dr. Phil Clark, the author of Distant Justice. Scholar's new book suggests the International Criminal Court is on the brink of collapse. And now is the time for African states to show greater willingness to address mass crimes. Dr. Phil Clark, reader in Comparative and International Politics, has talked to Top Africa News TV on his new book launch, as well as the book linkage to Rwanda's traditional justice system known as Gacaca. Again, don't forget to subscribe to Top Africa News YouTube page. You are welcome, Dr. Clark.
I'm Australian by nationality, but I was born in Khartoum. I grew up in Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire. I've been coming to Rwanda now for 16 years, and in the last few years I've been working with the Aegis Trust in the research policy and higher education program, training Rwandan researchers. So I've been on a book tour for the last 3 weeks, ending here in Kigali this week, and in many ways it feels like coming home.
Yeah, you talked about the book tour, and we have heard that tomorrow you will launch a book. Can you tell us about that book?
The book is called Distant Justice, the impact of the International Criminal Court on African politics. And what the book is doing is analysing the political, the social, the cultural effect that the ICC has had right across Africa over the last 14 or 15 years. And what I find in the book is that generally the ICC's impact in Africa has been incredibly negative. It has failed to conduct effective investigations. It's often undermined domestic justice and reconciliation processes. It's seen by many affected communities as being very illegitimate. And ultimately, I think the ICC has been making justice and peace more difficult rather than much easier right across the African continent. So it's a book that really takes a bottom-up approach and looks at how the ICC has actually been acting in Africa for many years now. And then it ends with some conclusions about reform of the court, what can be done to try to make the ICC more effective. And most importantly, how do we empower domestic institutions and domestic processes in Africa to start to deal with genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity? So my book ultimately concludes that the future does not lie with the ICC, that the future lies with national and community-based practices in African societies. I think they're going to be much more effective at dealing with the legacies of mass conflict.
Yeah, we have read part of the book, and we have found that you show that ICC is undermining the justice in Africa. Don't you expect some negative attack that you have undermined the ICC?
Already there's been some pushback against my book from some actors inside the court itself. The ICC finds itself at a very difficult moment. I think that the court in many respects is in a state of crisis because of the acquittals of Jean-Pierre Bemba and Laurent Gbagbo last year, also because of the halting of ICC investigations in Afghanistan because of US interference. This has been a very embarrassing period for the court, and the court itself is quite defensive at the moment. So a book like mine has come out in an atmosphere already of real concern within the court itself. And so some actors within the ICC are worried that a book like mine is calling for the collapse of the ICC. In many ways, that's not what I'm arguing in the book. I'm in fact saying that I think there is some scope for reform. I think we can make the ICC better and more effective than it is at the moment, but that at the same time, much more energy and resource needs to be put into bolstering African judiciaries, supporting African states in finding non-prosecutorial mechanisms to deal with conflict. So the book is not trying to kill the ICC off, it's rather trying to bolster it and make it more effective, while also ensuring that we don't only talk about international justice and that we also talk about domestic remedies to mass violence.
if there is no reform in ICC, where do you see ICC is going?
The ICC as an institution is in real trouble at the moment. And one of the things that I show in the book is that in many respects it was in trouble from day one. One of the big problems with the ICC was that it never brought into the institution the kind of African expertise that you need to navigate the terrain on the ground. This was a court that was always trying to do distant justice with non-African specialists. And that's a very poor way to conduct investigations on the ground. You can't drop foreigners into these conflict zones if they have no previous experience on the African continent and expect them to build effective cases. You also can't expect those non-African actors to know how to navigate the cultural terrain, the political terrain. And so from day one, the court was very poorly designed, and also it staffed itself with people who were not necessarily equipped to be able to do these very difficult cases in Africa. And so for that reason, I argue that we're really at a crossroads with the ICC now. Is it serious about changing the way that it does its work? Is it serious about changing the profile of its personnel? Or is it simply going to try to keep doing things the way that it's been doing it over the last 15 or 16 years? If it's the latter, then I think the court is likely to be on the brink of collapse within a year or two. But I think there is increasingly a recognition, even in The Hague, that the court can't keep doing things the way that it's been doing it. This is time for really major reform.
Yeah, the country like Rwanda, and a member of ICC, how Rwanda is going to benefit from your book?
I think the importance of the book here in Rwanda is that, in fact, Rwanda has always been a leader in pushing domestic remedies. So, for example, Rwanda has used the Gacaca process to prosecute genocide suspects. We've seen a domestic reform process in the judiciary here to make the local courts capable of dealing with very difficult cases. I think the important message here in Rwanda is that Rwanda now needs to lead an Africa-wide conversation about domestic responses. I think the role that Rwanda can play in all of this is extremely important because Rwanda has a track record. Rwanda can say, we basically dealt with the genocide on our own terms, with our own institutions, and even with creative remedies like Gacaca, which didn't exist before. That's a message that other African states would benefit from. And I launched my book in Addis Ababa a couple of weeks ago. And even amongst some very senior AU officials, there is a skepticism that African states, in fact, are equipped to deal with genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. One of the things that I said to very senior people in the AU was, you can learn a lot from what Rwanda did to deal with genocide crimes. You can learn a lot from the reform process in the Congolese courts, especially in Ituri. There are important developments within Africa that show African leadership and an African desire to deal with serious crimes. And so Rwanda can play a very important role in spreading that message across the continent and mobilizing a lot more African agency on these issues, rather than simply hoping that the ICC will swoop in and solve everybody's problems. Rwanda has a really important role to play.
Yeah. Can you tell us how to access the book?
So the book firstly will be available for sale at the launch tomorrow, and then soon after it will be available in Ikerezi bookstore here in Kigali. It's also available online as an ebook. I know some people like to read books electronically. The advantage of an ebook is that you don't have to wait for the book to arrive in Ikerezi or by delivery. But for those people who want a hard copy of the book, Ikerezi in the next week or two will be the place to look.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Thank you.